The Marcos administration gets a negative rating in terms of its response to rising prices of goods and services. The latest Pulse Asia survey conducted from September 17 to 21 reveals the government got a net approval rating of -11 in addressing inflation. The administration got high ratings in all other areas, such as controlling the spread of COVID-19 and responding to the needs of calamity-hit areas. The same survey also shows more than half of Filipino adults see inflation as the most urgent concern. It's the prevailing view for all geographic areas and socio-economic classes. Inflation hit 6.9% in September, the highest in 4 years. Joining us now for more on this latest Pulse survey is Pulse Asia President Ronnie Holmes. Ronnie, thank you so much for joining us. It seems from this negative ratings of the Marcos administration, many of our kababayans are concerned that soaring consumer prices plus a weak peso against the US dollar are hurting their purchasing power and boring a deeper hole into their pockets.
It appears to be the case, and we've seen this. This is a continuation of the sentiment of the public that was registered also in our second quarter survey, Rico, where basically the same amount of disapproval was registered with regard to the previous administration's performance in addressing the increasing prices of commodities or controlling inflation. So we've seen it in the past 2 quarters, and we don't expect it to be reduced in any way, especially with the news that, the OPEC is reducing the production of oil. That would definitely have an impact also, again, in terms of the prices of commodities and services.
Indeed, because this would lead to potentially higher oil prices once again. And many analysts are also projecting that with the central bank not raising interest rates as aggressively as other countries, we could see a weaker peso against the US dollar, maybe as low as 63 to 65 pesos. Also, priority among Filipinos, Ronnie, is increasing workers' pay at 44% in your survey. More than a third of Filipinos highlighted the urgency of creating more jobs and reducing poverty.
Yeah. Basically, the 4 major issues that were identified by most Filipinos were really economic issues. And this is the first time at the start of the administration that I can recall that you basically have largely the gut issues being mentioned as the more urgent concerns. It's really a result of all of the things that have happened globally over the past year. And we don't expect any change in terms of these conditions, specifically the intrusion of Russia in Ukraine that has caused much of the inflation that we see, not only in the Philippines, but also in many other countries.
And of course, that sentiment, Ronnie, is also showing up in the latest data on the Philippine jobless tally, which rose to 2.68 million in August, and the underemployment tops 7 million. So, I mean, Filipinos are still hungry for more jobs.
Yeah, it's thought to be an urgent concern. However, you do see majority are still approving of the administration's performance. Although in this survey, Rico, just to clarify, because when we asked the question, we were asking them about the last quarter. So you're dealing essentially with even including the prior administration performance. But they're happy about the creation of more jobs, but I think the job creation rate is quite slow. And you see it in actually the official statistics that were posted in August.
And of course, we've seen the president having state visits to Singapore and Indonesia and a visit to the United States with pledges in the billions of dollars. But the big question now is, will this really be translated into direct foreign investments and create more jobs for Filipinos?
Yeah, and it's really a balancing act. I think the economic managers of the president will be really faced with serious challenges in terms of what to do, whether you should increase, again, interest rates, because an increase in interest rates would have an impact also in terms of inflation. It may be able to arrest the decline of the peso, but whether it will help the economy insofar as even inviting investors from abroad Those are the things that I think I would rather not put myself in the shoes of the economic managers right now, given that the circumstances we're faced with are not just of our own making, but are also felt in many other countries, both developed and developing.
All right, out of the 13 issues, 11 of them, the president and the government got very high approval ratings, including fighting graft and corruption. In this survey, Ronnie, does it already include the sugar importation fiasco?
Yeah, I think the Senate committee report was already issued prior to the survey. And that investigation had proceeded for about 2 months already. So that was covered by the news prior to the survey. And it's expected, the first few days, few months of the administration, you really have the public who are more appreciative of the administration's performance. Subsequently, after the first 100 days, we don't exactly know whether this sentiment will remain or not, depending largely on the conditions that will obtain prior to the next survey.
On COVID-19, it also got a high approval rating, the COVID-19 response, but it basically nearly froze all economic activities for 2 years, Ronnie. Landed among the least mentioned national concerns. Is this an indication that the public is no longer concerned about the pandemic?
Well, I think essentially, given the fact that you've got a less severe variant, I think right now, I mean, based on the statistics that we're seeing, although the infection rates may remain quite significant, the severity of COVID-19 must decline compared to, let's say, the initial cases of COVID that we saw about 2 years ago. So I think there's a less concern for COVID. Maybe there's still some concern for the spread of COVID, but the numbers that we're seeing is not the same as what we saw, let's say, for example, a year before. It's a significant reduction.
And for the trends in your next survey, do you see more of the same, higher approval ratings for 11 issues and the economic issues having negative ratings?
I think it's hard to predict whether it will be more of the same because you're entering into the holiday season. There are expectations that conditions may be better. People may be more optimistic also and a bit more, there's an expectation really that prices will be increasing closer to the Christmas or the holiday season. But whether this will generate the same amount of approval for the administration, it will largely depend on what the administration would be doing with regard to these 4 major concerns.
Ronnie, thank you so much for joining us on The Final Word. Pulse Asia President Ronnie Holmes.